Welcome, everybody. Today is the ninth episode of the Don't Sink podcast. Today, I have Laura Lynch. She is a financial advisor and also a tiny home enthusiast, and she also has a podcast of her own called the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. And I'm going to give her an introduction and let her introduce herself and what she does and where she's from.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Noah, so much for having me on Don't Sink. I
Of
love
course.
your premise of
Thank you.
elevating the quietest stories.
Thank you.
I think there are so many wonderful stories out there, and people are doing amazing things in this moment in time. And so I try to work with people that are doing amazing things that are different
Yeah.
because all of us know kind of what we're supposed to do when we,
Yeah.
get done with our high school or whatever. We all know the path that we're expected to follow. And yet that path is not necessarily a good fit for everyone. And so
Surely.
I'm really here to help people dig deep into what is most important to them, what are their true values, and design a lifestyle around those values and making an impact in a way that is true to them. So that's where my sort of financial planning little universe lives, is trying to help
Nice.
people, especially think about their housing and how to maybe design housing around where they would want to live and what their lifestyle looks like.
Yeah, that sounds like something I need. My lifestyle's all over the place. I'm wondering how you got into that space of financial planning. Like when you were coming out of high school, what made you go that direction?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, my parents didn't have any investments or,
Mm-hmm.
any significant savings. I couldn't finish college. I only got through one semester. And then my dad is like, sorry, we can't continue to take out loans for you to go to school, which
Mm-hmm.
was a major gift in disguise because I didn't know what I was doing and where
You're
I
right,
was going.
right.
So I joined the military.
Okay.
And so spent 6 years active duty in the Air Force,
Wow.
and then
Fascinating.
came out of the Air Force trying to figure out how do I create a career for myself because my
Yeah.
job in the Air Force wasn't transferable. So I landed in some administrative roles and then started to learn some financial skills around insurance, so health insurance and life insurance. And then eventually I was kind of in a place where I was very unhappy in my career, being in the corporate world, and had a friend who became a financial advisor. And I'm like, what is this thing that you're doing? I don't know. What is a financial advisor? And
Right.
so I started to understand that, in that role, I could help other people plan their life and help them make good decisions and help them create some savings for themselves that would
Right.
allow them to have more freedom in their decision making. And so that's how I got into the career. And then I spent 5 years in a sort of big organization. And then just last year, I said, you know what? I want to move to my tiny house full time because I don't want to be
Yeah.
mortgage anymore. And the pandemic really showed me that having some independence is really a good place to be. And
Yeah.
so I left my corporate role and started my own firm from, very ground
Yeah.
zero to help
Definitely.
people choose a different path for themselves.
Yeah, I think financial literacy is so important. There's so many people, including myself, that you know y- they 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 know what they're supposed to do, but it's just so hard to do it. And we know that we're supposed to save money, we're supposed to invest our money, but then we're just so compulsive and so reactive the way we use our money and for our finances. I find it very noble that you're helping people find their financial literacy path and uh, create a world around what they love to do and their passions. Um, I think if we, I think if we all get into a space where financial literacy is something cool to learn about and it's not such a daunting task, and so many people are overwhelmed by all the information that bombards them on the internet and the newest ways to make money and save money. I think a lot of people need a financial advisor in their life. I definitely would need one because it's so tough to keep up with your finances. It's definitely a learned skill.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
we have to give ourselves a little credit because the
Hmm.
entire system is designed to confuse the heck out of you,
Hmm.
because it's really complicated and the jargon and the algorithms and all the things. It's very confusing. And then, too, we're bombarded constantly. Every screen we turn on is trying to make us buy stuff.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
And so people are just doing what they're told to do, right? You're
Hmm.
expected to be, shopping all the time. And so it's really hard to, turn that off and turn
Yeah,
off that motivation when it's constantly flooding you. Because saving is about, sometimes saying no to things that, maybe that you would otherwise purchase. And so saying no means you have to say no to the constant
yeah,
media telling you got to be buying these latest gadgets and these
yeah,
latest everything, right?
definitely. How did you get into the tiny house? Like, what was your first interaction with the tiny house?
So I don't know the exact moment at which I became aware of tiny houses. Um, probably on HGTV at some point.
Yeah.
I took a trip to out to Oregon one time and saw a bunch of
Mhm.
really small homes up in the mountains.
Okay.
And so what happened was that I had lived in when I was associated with the Air Force. I was out in Nevada,
Nice.
and so I really became enthralled with the West and the way that you can be outside, away from people. And
Yeah.
there's so much history, Native American petroglyphs on rock
Yeah.
walls and things. And so became really fascinated with the open spaces of the West. I grew up in Virginia.
Yeah.
Have been living in Florida for a number of years, very populated with
Yeah.
people. And so in 2015, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of being around all these people all the time. I need a little space.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I bought 8 acres of raw land in a White Rock Canyon for
Nice.
$25,000.
Wow.
And so we were like, what are we going to do with this property? We'd like to go out there and stay. Should we
Mhm.
camp? What should we do? And we didn't have time. We were both, very busy working. We didn't have time to go build anything. So we decided to build a house on a trailer, which is a tiny house, right?
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
take it out there and put it on the land. So we spent a year of Saturdays in our backyard building a tiny house on a trailer ourselves. So just
Wow.
little bits of progress. The trailer
Hmm.
was $3,000 off of Craigslist. And
Yeah.
then it was just little bits of progress for a year. And I took it out there. I will say that it's important if someone's going to do that to start to understand what you cannot do on the land.
Hmm.
Maybe before you purchase the land. This is not
Yeah.
necessarily research that I
Hmm.
had done in advance.
Okay.
So there's a lot, a little bit of pre work you can put into that for sure. But
Hmm.
eventually, the tiny house got out there. We towed it across the country. That was super nerve wracking, and then put it there. And then we went back there, a couple times a year just to spend time and, disconnected from our phones and, out in the sort of, emptiness. And then the
Mhm.
pandemic happened. And then I'm like, okay, enough with this mortgage, enough with this
Yeah.
normal American dream life. Let's go do something totally different so that we don't have to feel so much pressure
Yeah.
to continue to make enough money, to pay for the house, to pay for all the things. Let's go live a
Yeah.
simpler life.
For sure. The pandemic definitely was smack in the face for everybody. It probably was the reason I started this podcast because I wanted to learn how to be more self efficient and self sufficient
Mhm.
because I was so terrified of like not necessarily the pandemic in and of itself, but I was more it gave me a like a window into like a future world where we might have another one that may be even worse.
Right?
And Walmart's aren't gonna save everyone. If everyone's rushing to go to Walmart, as you know, things were running out, shelves were
Right.
empty, and I think I'm so fascinated by the tiny house lifestyle because now in a space where I want to get away from the the density of my city, and I want to explore more rural areas, and hopefully one day live on my own out there. What would be some advice for people that want to live in a tiny house, like not necessarily on the tiny house, but other things you have to learn when you're living that lifestyle?
Yes. So the very first thing you have to do is you have to dig into where,
Hmm.
because tiny homes and any home that is
Hmm.
sort of different from what we see around us every day,
Yeah.
um, has to be kind of researched, because each city in each county in each state gets a say into what they will allow to be a residence. So the
Okay.
very first thing is to dig into where you would want to do this. So if
Hmm.
you're in Cleveland, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so if you're trying to get outside of Cleveland and you're trying to get outside of city, what county would you want to do this in? Where would affordable land be? And then
Hmm.
what are going to be the rules for what you can and cannot do on that land? And
Right.
so there are things like understanding if there is going to be a whole permitting process required for putting a residential dwelling on that house. And if
Hmm.
so, what are the steps to go through? Because very often there is a minimum square footage requirement
Okay.
unless you're on agriculture land, which
Okay.
agriculture land varies from
Mm.
county to
Yeah.
state. So, still understanding what that looks like. Anytime you're in residential zoning, there's going to be probably requirements around what the building looks like. Now, there are lots of cities and counties um, and state regulations that have started to legalize tiny homes, but they're
Okay.
all defining them kind of differently.
Hmm.
Sometimes tiny homes on wheels, the ones like
Yeah.
mine and the ones that you see, driving down the road being towed, those are being allowed. Oftentimes, they're being allowed as a secondary, what's called accessory dwelling unit. So, secondary living space after
Hmm.
there's a regular house. But in some places, you can use them as a primary dwelling.
Hmm.
And so, digging into the where and what are going to be the rules is the number one thing before you ever even start looking at what kind of tiny house would I want to do,
Right.
because that's important. A lot of people want to go on the road. So they want to, do
Yeah.
tiny living in a more, sort of vagabond or, nomadic fashion.
Yeah.
That again, you've got to figure out where all you're going to park and what that's going to,
Hmm.
cost from a, lifestyle spending perspective. So where is the very first step? And there's a lot of things to unpack there.
Yeah.
Um, but there are some great resources out there. And I work with the Tiny Home Industry Association,
Okay.
tinyhomeindustry.association.org. And we
Nice.
have a resource map where you can click on a state and you can see what legislation, what rules have been passed in different municipalities allowing tiny homes. But it is a little bit of a research project to figure out the where.
When it comes to your career and financial planning, how did that prepare you for your tiny house adventure?
Yeah, so it's interesting because before the tiny house got started in my life, I wasn't in, financial planning.
Okay.
And I kind of had a little bit of a bad, sort of experience both with the idea around investing and with the real estate market. So, the very
Hmm.
first home I bought was in 2007, right before the Great Recession.
Yeah.
And so I got divorced in 2009. And at that
Hmm.
time, the home that we purchased in 2007 was outside of Las Vegas. Las Vegas market was hit really hard with the Great
Mm.
Recession. So, the home that we purchased was way underwater.
Mm.
So, and then, having not known anything about investing or investments or the market or anything, my experience with what happened with the Great Recession is like, why would I ever put any of my money in something that is so wildly
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
unpredictable? Yeah. And so learning through my financial planning career what are normal market movements, what caused the Great Recession, how that was very unusual situation, both
Mhm.
prepared me to help clients kind of there's a thing called recency bias where we get really
Right.
focused on the kind of bad news that we've recently heard, and we
Mhm.
really amplify that in our minds. We also have a negativity bias where we
Yeah.
feel negative things 10 times stronger than we feel
Yeah, for
positive
sure.
things. So, helping clients kind of think through the way that they approach the world of finance and investing, what their negative connotations are there, came from my own experience and then learning past that experience. But with that said, I also agree with you that we're in a time where we are in compounding change. It's not just
Yeah.
one thing that's changing. So many things are changing all at the same time, and they're all going to have interplaying effects.
Yeah.
And so building resilience for ourselves looks more than just making sure that you're building some savings. It means
Mhm.
seeing if you have the ability to bring in some new skills, some new ways that you could maybe make money, some
Yeah.
new ways that you could trade for things that you might need, because we don't know what is going to be the next crisis. And so we all
Mhm.
need to be working to be as capable as possible to take care of ourselves, to be resilient. It's not just about building up savings, though, of course, that's important too, but it is about building up our full range of ways that we can take care of
Yeah,
ourselves.
definitely. What how much, um, do you see a difference in the day-to-day finances of upkeeping a tiny home versus a house with a mortgage?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the average home price in the United States right now is $430,000. Now,
Yeah.
that varies widely
Yeah,
depending
yeah.
on where you are, right? You can't buy
Mhm.
much of anything where I am standing right now for $430,000. And, there's rural places in Alabama where you can buy something for, $90,000,
Yeah,
right? So, it
yeah.
really varies by location. But interest rates are also higher than what they were a few years ago. From a
Mhm.
historical perspective, they're not crazy, but they do impact how much you have to spend for your housing if you do buy an average home right now. And generally
Mhm.
speaking, tiny houses are one third or less of the average home price. So, depending on what type of tiny house you're looking at, you can definitely get by with a lot cheaper house, right? Because it's a smaller package.
Yeah.
It is a little bit more expensive, maybe than you would think, because you've got all of your appliances and utilities like packed into a smaller package.
Mhm.
So, but in any case, it is a third or less. And so if you can really focus on paying that off,
Mhm.
um, you can really get it paid off a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And then that just kind of frees you up to say, hey, I'm not paying for my house anymore.
Yeah.
So, what can I do with this money? Maybe I can start a business. Maybe I can,
Mhm.
really work on my saving strategy. Maybe I could spend more time volunteering in my community so that I have a larger impact. Like it just
Mhm.
creates a financial freedom element.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just buy a regular house and then you get into a 30-year mortgage, you are stuck in that I've got to keep paying this thing off for 30 years. And with the interest rates, what they are right now, you pay way more in interest than you
Yeah.
ever pay to actually pay off the house. So that $430,000 house at 7% interest for 30 years, you pay $599,000 in interest.
Wow.
And that doesn't count your insurance, which you have to have on your home if you have a mortgage. You're going to have taxes on your home. And then
Mhm.
you also have upkeep, which can, be a significant additional cost to the home. So I
Yes.
love tiny homes for the
Mhm.
purpose of saying, hey, maybe the size of my house is not the most important thing to me. Maybe there
Mhm.
are other things that are far more important to me. So let
Yeah.
me buy less house and therefore be able to create more impact in my life in another way.
Yeah, that's very important, because, I mean, everyone has a different size family. Some people have, just it's just them and their partner, or they have kids. But I think the real estate of in terms of like size of your home is probably a compromise that a lot of people aren't so willing to make. But can you speak on how you've become more in tune with the environment around you, being around less people?
Yeah. So for me, I am standing right now in my regular size house that is for sale.
Mhm,
And in 4 months, we are moving to our tiny house full time.
mhm,
And then we are going from a very populated place where, all of the grocery and shopping is 15 minutes away. I'm still pretty rural. I'm not in the middle of an urban center anymore.
mhm.
Um, but we're going to a place with a town of 300 people.
Cool.
So very very big change. There's all kinds of cultural pieces to that. Here, where I am right now, there's so many people coming here. I'm in Florida. So many people
Mhm,
coming here to Florida from all different places. People do not speak to you in the grocery store, right? They
mhm.
don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And, maybe I have a chit chat with my neighbors, once in a blue moon, but it's not
Mhm.
like they're like family. They're not.
Yeah.
And so we're moving to a place where you do talk to the people in line somewhere, and there is like a small Facebook group, and you can interact with your neighbors, and people come to the farmers market together, and
Yeah.
they know each other, and they ask about health and that sort of thing. And I am really looking forward to having people to be in part of a place instead
Mhm.
of just residing in a place where I don't feel connected. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. That small town, tight-knit community, I think, is what a lot of people are missing, especially with the new age of technology and everyone's looking down at their phone. And I think that interaction with people in your community not only fosters more of a village mentality, um, it also can benefit you as an individual because you like in terms of the COVID pandemic, so many people were like shielded up and just scared of people. Like we had to stay 6 feet away from people. We're always wearing a mask. Like it became like fear based in terms of how we interact with the world around us. And I think if we lived in these tight knit communities, it would be so much more beneficial going forward as a nation because we would understand we can live and coexist with people that may not look like us, may not talk like us, may not believe in what we believe in, but we are all putting in our part to this community. Um, when you first made your tiny house and picked your location, um, how long did it take, or did it take any time for you to get adjusted to that new way of living?
So that's a great question. I don't know if I am fully adjusted yet
Mhm,
because we're not there full time yet. It is a huge change. It
mhm.
is a huge change in all the ways. We're going
Yeah.
from sea level to 6,000 feet. We're going
Mhm.
from a place with almost 200,000 people
Yeah.
to a place with 300 people. The drive to Walmart is longer. It's it's a huge change. I think a good way to adapt any change is to do it in small increments
Yeah.
or in a way where you get to try something out. And so there are lovely ways that you can rent tiny homes.
Mhm.
In an Airbnb environment and sort of check out the experience before you take yourself from a regular size house to a smaller space.
Mhm.
Likewise, I went to that community a number of times to sort of feel it out. By having a place to stay there, obviously, was a huge help. But sort of testing it out. I also read the the newspaper that comes from that community on a regular basis to see how I'm feeling about the place. I tried to get to know people as quickly as possible to feel
Mhm.
people out. What's the vibe
Yeah.
here? Um, and so I think it's always good to do some research because there's really a huge difference that you can find between different places. So where I'm going, it's a very artistic community. So there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of
Mhm.
diversity of thought. There's
Yeah.
just a political bent there. There's
Mhm.
just a lot of things that you might want to know about before you go to that place. And so every time, I'm thinking about, other future moves or helping clients with moves, like understanding what's going on in a place and the culture of the place and the history informs the culture. Like all of those things I think are really important if you want to find a place where you can feel just truly comfortable with yourself. And I also
Mhm.
want to go back to something, you were talking about a minute ago. I read this beautiful book called Platonic recently,
Okay.
and it talks about the neuroscience of how important social connection is.
Yeah.
So having good community and social connection is just as important as what we eat and how much sleep we get.
Yes.
So I think you're totally on the right track with that village mentality and community because it is literally very important for our physical health. And I'm a little bit of an
Yeah.
introvert. I kind
Yeah.
of like to keep to myself.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I have to kind of make myself forge those connections and those relationships. But it
Mhm.
is really important for all of us, for our overall health and well being, mental and otherwise, to have relationships.
Totally. I believe that as well. Um, planning your when someone is planning their first tiny home venture, for example, let's say I found my land, I did my research, I got my let's say in like Utah or something, I found this plot of land I want to build on and I got my trailer. Um, how important is um like region in terms of your tiny home? Like where is a prime location to put your home? Should you put your home somewhere near water or is it important to have it near a big city in relativity? Or is it just personal preference?
Yeah, great questions. So, climate is important, right? A tiny
Yeah.
house is going to be something that maybe you're going to want to be outside of, at
Hmm.
some points because it's a smaller house. So,
Hmm.
if you're into being out of doors, you might want to think about how much time you can spend outside.
Hmm.
So, that's an important component. Obviously, how you make money is important. So,
Yeah.
if you're completely virtual, then you need to make sure that you have a place where you can get signal to
Hmm.
do your work.
Yeah.
If you are going to have to, have a job where you need to be in person, then you need to do some research on, what's going on from an industry perspective in that area, making sure that you can find a job there. The commute time, of course, is important. Weather conditions, people tend to, it seems like these days, be really focused on how many days of sun they get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just all of those things. I actually kind of think in spreadsheets and,
Yeah.
like here are all the points, right? That I want to
Yeah.
make sure that
Same.
I have been thinking about. And here's all the potential places that might be good. And yes, this
Hmm.
one's good for sun. No, this one's not good for sun. Yes, this one's going to be good if temperatures continue to increase. No, this
Hmm.
one won't be good for that. The community, and just kind of think through all those points. And no place is going to be perfect, just like no person is perfect.
Yeah.
But finding the best collection of good points, I think,
Hmm.
is, a good way to kind of figure out where you might want to put it from a regional perspective.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that mentality of I gotta plan everything out in a spreadsheet. I use so many spreadsheets. I want like to have every single increment of everything I'm gonna do already predetermined. Um, and speaking on that, um, when you moved or when you made your tiny house and you first started spending time in it, what were some things that you didn't foresee that you found out that you had just you had planned every aspect, you moved in, and then you were like, "Oh, I didn't see this coming."
Yeah, so I bought a washer dryer combo that doesn't dry clothes.
Oh,
So that
wow.
means I line dry my clothes, which is fine. I'm in a very
Mhm.
dry, my tiny house is out in New Mexico. It's very dry there. Clothes dry super fast outside. So,
Yeah,
um, but I guess I thought that machine was going to do all the things. It doesn't do all the things.
yeah.
Also because we've been living in Florida for, I've been here since 2010.
Mhm.
Um, we are still working through our water challenges. So I also study permaculture. And so
Okay,
rainwater catchment is how we're getting our rainwater or getting our
okay.
water there. And
Mhm.
so far, we've been pretty self reliant from collecting rainwater in a cistern, but we're not going to be able to collect enough rainwater to live there full time.
Mhm.
So we ended up getting an adjacent parcel that has a well on it. So we have sort of a
Okay.
backup water. But in the meantime, understanding rainwater catchment, how you filter it, if you are going to drink it, how that works out. Like that's been a big learning curve.
Mhm.
Um, so, that's just particularly in the sort of off grid world of
Yeah,
tiny living. Your water and your power are two big, two big
yeah,
concerns. Um, so, I think I don't know what I don't know, right? Is
yeah,
is a good way to just sort
definitely.
of chalk up all those things and you learn as you go and
Mhm.
you build self-confidence as you go. So you
Mhm.
pick up that hammer for the first time or
Yeah.
you start learning about solar for the first time and it seems insurmountable, just like with finances, right? Getting
Mhm.
started is the hardest part.
Yes.
Like just, doing that thing for the first time is hard. And then as soon as you get a little bit of knowledge, then
Yeah,
you can just bring in a little bit more knowledge. And so over time, it's like Lego blocks. You're
yeah.
just building your knowledge and it builds also your confidence that way. So you just keep
Mhm.
building your confidence a little bit at a time and having compassion with yourself. I'm not going to have this all figured out. Maybe I can't think about it anymore today because I just feel so confused and overwhelmed. Let me come back to it a different day when I have a little bit more
Yeah,
sort of patience for it. I think that's just, it's a beautiful journey, right? And then you look back on that in a few years and you go, wow, I'm such a different person today. I feel so much more confident than I did back then. I know so much more. I can help other people who are doing this thing. Like
yeah.
it's just a great thing to tackle new things in our lives. It's good for us in so many ways.
Yes, yes. That slow learning, so much of us have to appreciate. Uh, when, what was my question? When you, I know you spoke earlier on the different formats of tiny house living. Like you can have one on wheels. You could build your own house from the ground up. In your research of tiny homes, what are some of the coolest implementations of a tiny home that you've seen?
Yeah. So it's so interesting because people are doing so many different things. I had a gal on my podcast who has no home at all. She
Oh
is
wow,
house sitting full time.
cool.
So she just goes from house sitting gig to house sitting gig. And so
Mm,
she lives in other people's houses all the time. There are
wow.
people, of course, doing the van life, right? So they
Hmm.
buy a converted van or they convert their own van. And again, that's a learning curve. Building out a
Yeah.
van is very different than building out
Hmm.
anything else. There are people doing the bus
Hmm.
conversion called schoolies. So they
Hmm.
buy an old bus and they convert an old bus. I like the bus format in particular because you have a lot more space to work with. So you can get really
Hmm.
creative. Yesterday
Yeah.
I was it was a van fest and they
Mm,
had some bus conversion schoolies there and I ran into a gal, great,
hmm.
fascinating. She must
Yeah.
be, in her late 20s and she has built a whole like a workshop garage in the back of the bus and
Wow.
she has a wheelchair lift that lifts up her motorcycle into the garage
That's so
and
cool.
she's traveling, all on her own with her dog and it was just amazing to see that other adaptation. Then, of
Yeah.
course, there's tiny house on wheels. There are tiny houses that, on wheels that can be towed around with like an F-250. There are
Hmm.
tiny homes on wheels that really only get moved one time because they require a permit. I had on my podcast John from Sevens Transport, and he transports tiny homes that need a highway permit.
Okay.
That's a great way because that's a little bit more space.
Mhm.
Then there are now modular ones that come that are
Mhm.
even larger that get put together on a foundation.
Cool.
There are people, I just recorded with a gentleman who bought some land that was unrestricted. He built
Mhm.
what he calls a shabin, which is a
Mhm.
shed converted to a cabin. I see the
Nice.
shed conversion happening a lot with people. Lots of Facebook groups about shed conversions, which is a very inexpensive way to go because you can get a shed from you can get a shed secondhand off of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. You could, buy one from Lowe's or Home Depot. My neighbor adjacent to my tiny house lives out of a 2-shed combo. She has one
Mm.
shed as a studio and one shed that she lives in. And so
Wow.
that's another interesting one. I'm very interested in the earth home movement and
Mhm.
building homes out of straw bales. In New Mexico,
Mhm.
there are earth ships that are made out of, tires filled with dirt that are then plastered over, and lots of
Wow.
recycled glass. And they come with their own when you build an earthship, you really focus on heating and cooling that just goes through tubes through the ground. So the hot air goes in and it cools and it comes up, and that's your air conditioning. And you
Yeah.
use windows to create solar warmth. And just, it's fascinating the different
Yeah.
ways that there are to live that's different from, going into a community or neighborhood and buying a house that was, built there before.
Yeah, that's so cool. Uh, it's really an infinite amount of ways you can go about it, and that's the cool part about it. Because a lot of people's homes, like contemporary homes, a lot of them look the same. Like, you see communities where it's a whole street of the same house,
Yeah.
and that freedom of creativity is so cool. Uh, can you speak on the ways you've seen uh, the environmental benefits of
Mhm.
living in a smaller space?
Yeah. This is something that is really important to me. I'm standing in a 2,300 square foot house.
Mm.
I spend most of my time on the porch, which is
Yeah,
outside, right?
yeah.
Or in the kitchen, or in
Mhm.
front of my computer and in bed, right? So there's a
Yep.
lot of square feet that I am paying, and we are using energy to cool in really
Mhm.
long summers in Florida, and it's very
Mhm.
wasteful, right?
Yeah,
For me.
yeah.
Now, if there was a huge family in here that spent a lot of time inside, that would make more sense.
Mhm.
But whenever you have a smaller package, right, you're going to
Yeah,
be using less resources to heat it, to cool it. If you are, thinking about your water conservation because you're already thinking about being efficient on the energy front, then you
mhm.
can certainly start to conserve water if that's important to you. Some of those other alternative buildings that I mentioned are, very little. Earthships are supposed to be completely self-contained and don't use
Yeah,
any outside energy. So the alternative living, alternative housing movement really presents an opportunity for folks to think through how they want to be using energy and what kind of footprint that they want to have,
yes.
and really allows you to make choices as opposed to when you buy a traditional home, you're going to be heating and cooling that thing,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not, because it's
Mhm.
important to maintain. You don't want mold, growing. And so you have to, take care of that entire house package.
Yeah,
And so when you shrink your house package, then you can really think, through how do I want to be more efficient? I'm already more efficient. What are other ways? And so it kind of brings in that opportunity to be, more environmentally focused.
yeah, that's so important. I I'm a little bit of an environment freak. I
Mhm.
so, like, sustainability and reusing the resources in a ethical way is something that's very important to me, and, I get that leads into my next question of the the average, the average working American, someone making 50 to $60,000 a year, is this an option that would be viable to them?
Yeah. So I just looked it up the other day. The average salary in the United States is 53.
Hmm.
So you're right on point with the number there. I just recorded a podcast episode with Tiny Estates
Okay.
they're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They are working on building communities all throughout the United States for tiny living. And what they're really
Wow.
focused on is how do we create a housing cost for folks that is attainable,
Mhm.
meaning 35% of $53,000.
Yeah.
So, of course, there is the opportunity to, get a tiny house at a third the price, of a
Hmm.
regular home. And then to be able to pay it off quicker and have more, income for the longer term. But for many people, right, who get into that average salary and stay that way their entire life, it's good to be able to extend that loan financing out for a longer period of time
Hmm.
because many people don't come into their tiny house having, say, $100,000 to just dump on a tiny house.
Yeah.
And so I really love what, Abby Shank had to say at Tiny Estates on my podcast about understanding the equation of what is attainable housing. And attainable housing is that 35% of that, sort of average salary, and that reaches more people. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely think that there are opportunities in the attainable housing place for people with, regular incomes to now get longer extended financing on a tiny house and then taking the cost of their loan and their cost of their utilities and the cost of their maybe rent for where their tiny home is placed and keeping that in
Hmm.
a manageable price point for the average person.
Yes, that's so important, and that's such a great opportunity for people to not only to explore a new way of life, but to the uh, escape the just the check to check living and extend their income a little bit more because things are only getting so much more expensive, and wages aren't necessarily matching that inflation of how things cost. And it goes back to the point of financial planning because with that financial literacy, you will even be more efficient at extending your income and using it in more efficient ways. Um, in terms of the communities that revolve around the tiny house lifestyle, what are different communities and conventions and places people can go to learn more about it?
So, are you talking about physical communities? Are you talking about like
Um,
uh,
like both,
more
like physical and virtual.
Yeah. So, physical communities, really, the tiny house movement is happening in different parts of the country faster than in other places.
Hmm.
So, California and Florida have both been early movers, probably due to some affordability crisis in California. For
Hmm.
sure, Colorado is building the largest tiny home community in the country in
Wow.
Salida. So I would say that maybe more politically progressive places
Hmm.
are sort of moving in this direction because they are a little bit more um, aware or salient in the affordable housing situation that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Um, then there are certainly pockets of places. That's where the Tiny Home Industry Association resource map can be
Hmm.
really helpful and kind of click on the state and see what's going on in that state. That's a great community to sort of follow the Tiny Home Industry Association to
Hmm.
learn about what's happening, to join on webinars and what have you, to sort of, gather information and do research about what's happening in tiny home legalization. Um, Tiny House Expedition has a great channel that provides a lot of resources. Their website has long lists of resources to keep an eye out for as far as different topics that you're trying to figure out in
Hmm.
moving forward. A lot of Facebook groups, regional Facebook group, tiny house supporters of enter your geographic region, right? There's people on Facebook
Yeah.
that are sort of coming together to get change made in the regulation in their area, because they have the power to kind of help the cities and the counties move forward with making changes.
Yeah.
Changes, we have to get over our inertia of the status quo of doing things the way they've always been done. And
Yeah.
so, when people come together to say, hey, we've got 100 people that have signed this petition to allow for a tiny house community in our county, we want to live this lifestyle. What can we do to help, move the county commission forward in adopting some, tiny home legalization?
Yeah.
So all of those things, it's very grassroots, very much about people taking the power in their own hands and pushing for what they want.
Yeah.
So those are kind of, I guess, the highlights of the geographical communities as well as the sort of virtual spaces.
Fascinating. How is New Mexico? What are some of the coolest things you've seen in New Mexico?
Yeah, New Mexico is one of the least populated states in the country.
Mhm.
New Mexico has pockets of, sort of high end. So Santa Fe, very expensive to live there, very popular city.
Mhm.
And there, is unfortunately like third generation addiction happening in the Espanola
Mhm.
Valley, which is kind of running through the middle of the northern part of New Mexico. A lot
Okay.
of poverty there. Um, so it is varied in that the terrain is varied. In the south, it is very, desert in the way that we think of it, lots of sand. There are, mountain ranges in the south too, but a lot flatter generally, a lot more sand. Then you move into
Mhm.
northern New Mexico and you start to look more like Colorado. Um,
Okay.
and there are, wealthy pockets, and then there are very poor pockets. The state is, like any place, it has its.
I think she froze. I think it froze up a little bit there. I think I got it though.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah.
Um, cool. Yeah, you good.
Yes, I just
Is a
lost
year?
power. I just lost
Oh yeah,
power.
you good.
So apologies. You'll
No,
have
you're
to
all
edit.
good. You're all good. Um, is a year a good outlook to uh build a tiny house? Like, is that a good time frame to go about um planning and building and putting it all together? Is like a year about as long as it takes?
Yeah, I think that um, a year, we did it in a year. We were just mostly doing it on weekends because we were
Mm-hmm.
working. We also had some pre-existing knowledge of, construction that helped there.
Mm-hmm.
People that go about different tiny house self builds that don't have any experience, I think take longer than that generally,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more like a year and a half or more to, kind of learn as they go. The
Yeah.
first job, of course, is to get the thing dried in, meaning watertight. So get a roof on
Okay.
it and, some temporary wall, exterior wall up. But in any case, once you kind of have done your research on the where and you feel like you've cleared the way for a good place to put it, then, definitely give yourself a year, depending on how much time you have to devote to the project. It can, it definitely isn't something that's done overnight for sure.
I guess my last question would be the future. I always like to end on a positive outlook towards the future. And what do you think the future of this new lifestyle is in terms of the expansion of it and what it could, the benefits it could have on people's lives?
So I feel like that tiny living has only so far worked for people who were really willing to do something totally outside of the norm, because it's been really
Yeah.
hard for folks because of the legalization complexity, and the financing
Yeah.
complexity. So there's currently work going on with a number of different important, influencers in the tiny living space that are working with the International Code Committee, which is the folks who write the language around how you can build residential living spaces, to bring more sort of concise language and more normalized procedures for building tiny homes to the whole country. And it's actually an international effort, so even beyond the United States. So if that were to help states and communities feel more comfortable with the concept, if that also enabled more readily available financing, that would be huge. And then
Yeah.
really, it's like the floodgates are just smashed with people who want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just been so hard to date. And you've kind of had to have been able to figure out how you're going to fund it yourself. That's why build it yourself can be really great, because you can sort of build it as your income allows you to do. So right now, it's pretty easy to, if you have a decent credit score and you've got 2 years worth of, income, you can go and get a loan for a regular house. And there's all kinds of programs, FHA, first time home buyer, VA financing, like all these different programs that are available to help people get into normal homes. The government has created pathways through, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and, different ways to back loans, government back loans and things. And so there's been this paved path for people to get into a normal mortgage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There hasn't been a paved
Definitely.
path for people to go tiny. And so as this path starts to get a little bit more paved, then there's just
Hmm.
so many people who want to do this because people value experiences more than things, it seems like younger people do. They just have different priorities. So I think that the future for it could be very bright the more that cities and counties recognize that housing has become unaffordable for their residents. And if the legalization piece and the financing piece sort of open up, even just a little bit, it makes more people able to achieve it without having to be, so resilient to get through the process.
Yeah, for sure. Where can people find you, your story, and follow you along your journey and your future endeavors in the tiny home space?
Yeah, so my podcast is Less House More Moolah, and Moolah is spelled
Nice.
Moola. On my podcast, Less House More Moolah. It's on all the platforms. My website is
Cool.
thetinyhouseadvisor.com, and advisor is spelled Adviser. And
Mhm.
I'm going to be working on a course coming up in the next few months, which is going to be a little bit of a financial literacy, financial competency thing that I'm going to offer, where folks can come watch a video on how to use a tool that I have that allows them to bring together all their financial information. So a lot easier than filling out a spreadsheet of how much did I spend
Yeah.
on eating out this week, right? It'll allow
Uh,
your cards and your everything to aggregate. You link it up with Plaid, which is the software that links to your bank accounts and your credit card accounts and everything. And so it brings all the data together. And then we'll
mhm.
sit down for 45 minutes and kind of look through, okay, here's a couple of important steps that you could take to help you move in the direction of tiny living. And so it'll be a very, sort of a great way to sort of get organized financially and also take a little bit of progress forward. So I'm still working on building that
Mhm.
out, but that'll be, available, and I'll be talking about it on the podcast in the next few months.
Sweet. Laura, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. You've been very comprehensive and informative. Um, Please and let me know when that course does drop because I would love to take it
Sure.
and learn more. Yeah, you've been great.
Well, thank you, Noah. It's been a pleasure to be on your podcast, and I hope that
Thank you.
you continue to have a lot of great, conversations, because you know how to ask the good questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I hope you have a great new year and I hope you the best of luck in your tiny house adventures.
Thank you, Noah.
Have a good day.
I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living.
Bottom line, there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Totally unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Ukraine.
A new world order can emerge. A new era
our time.
Most people just don't want to run for book.
Peace in all time.